Hello everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into the fascinating science behind something we literally all struggle with. Why do our well-intentioned routines almost always fail? And more importantly, how can we actually fix them? Instead of just throwing around vague motivational advice, we're going to explore how to build truly unbreakable habits using hard data, historical case studies, and some pretty incredible neuroscience.
Let's start with a hard-hitting reality check. Think about the sheer volume of choices you make every single day. Well, studies show that roughly 45% of our daily behaviors aren't actually conscious choices at all. They're deeply ingrained habits. Yet, despite being creatures of such strong habit, we are notoriously terrible at creating new ones on purpose. 80%. That is the staggering failure rate of New Year's resolutions by mid-February. We set a goal, we get super excited, and then, a few weeks later, we completely abandon it.
Okay, let's dive into this. We're talking about all those classic habits we totally know we should be doing, but constantly avoid. You know, eating healthy, daily exercise, meditation, actually going to bed early. We know the benefits, yet the execution just falls completely flat. And remarkably, the data shows that even when faced with literal life-or-death diagnoses from their doctors, 6 out of 7 patients still fail to change their negative lifestyle habits. It proves that simply knowing better, or even facing dire consequences, just isn't enough to rewrite our routines. So, what actually works?
That brings us to Section 1, the power of 1%, and the British cycling miracle.
For almost a century, the British cycling team was pretty much the definition of mediocrity. Since 1908, they'd won just a single gold medal at the Olympic Games, and they had literally never won the Tour de France. In fact, European bike manufacturers actually refused to sell them gear because they were terrified the association would hurt their brand. No way, right? But everything completely changed in 2003 when they hired a man named Dave Brailsford as their new performance director. Brailsford didn't come in and demand a total, exhausting overhaul of the athletes' lives. Instead, he put the team on a radically new trajectory through a philosophy he called the aggregation of marginal gains. Basically, he believed that if you broke down every single conceivable aspect of riding a bike and improved it by just 1%, the accumulated result would be a massive, unbeatable advantage. And sure enough, by 2008, they won 60% of the gold medals at Beijing. By 2012, they took home the Tour de France. So, how exactly did they pull this off? Well, if you look at their micro improvements, they got absurdly specific. They didn't just train harder, they redesigned bike seats to make them slightly more comfortable. They had riders wear heated overshorts to maintain the ideal muscle temperature. They even went as far as hiring a surgeon to teach grown adults the absolute optimal way to wash their hands, just to avoid catching a 1% performance-draining cold. They even painted the floor of the team truck white just to spot tiny specks of dust that could degrade the bike gears. It's crazy, but it proves that massive, earth-shattering success doesn't actually require massive, exhausting action. Unpacking the math behind this concept, author James Clear enthusiastically explains that habits basically act as the compound interest of self-improvement. If you can get just 1% better each day for 1 year, you don't just become 365% better. Because it compounds, you end up a whopping 37 times better by the time you're done. These small choices, they really don't seem to make much of a difference in the moment, but they add up to an insurmountable gap over the long term.
Section 2. Consistency over intensity and the Terra research data.
Terra Research recently tracked the wearable tech data of over 379 users to figure out exactly what separates the top performers from everyone else. They identified a few distinct profiles, but I want to juxtapose 2 in particular: the high-step heroes and the boom and bust users. The boom and bust users rely on occasional extreme bursts of energy. Think doing an intense 90-minute hit or spin session on a Sunday, but then remaining totally sedentary for the rest of the week. The high-step heroes, on the other hand, just focus on keeping moving every single day through smaller, steady habits. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the coefficient of variation, or CV, right there in the middle. This measures how wildly a user's activity levels swing from day to day. The boom and bust users have a massive 54.9% variability. But the high-step heroes, they have a much lower 36.4% variability. They're averaging over 11,500 steps a day, with a much higher overall activity score, not because they're killing themselves in the gym, but because they are relentlessly reliable. The statistical realities favor consistency. Steady, repeatable habits like a 10-minute daily walk or using a standing desk vastly outshine those erratic bursts of heroic intensity.
Let's move on to Section 3, rewiring your brain and the neuroscience of habit. We know that a consistent minimum effective dose is the key to behavioral success, but let's look at the biological perspective for a second to explain exactly why this physically works. When you practice a small habit daily, you aren't just checking a box on a to-do list, you're actually physically altering the structure of your brain. Now, you would think adults have more neurons, right? Actually, Oxford University discovered that average adults have 41% fewer neurons than newborn babies. Babies are born with this blank canvas of neurons, but as we grow up, our brains do some incredibly aggressive spring cleaning.
And this brings us to a biological phenomenon called synaptic pruning. It's the process where your brain literally prunes away the neural connections that don't get used, while simultaneously building up and strengthening the connections that do get used frequently. If you practice the piano for 10 years, those neural pathways become thicker, faster, and much more efficient. But if you never play the piano, those pathways are simply deleted to save energy. Every single time you consistently repeat a small habit, you're laying down a permanent neural highway in your brain.
Which brings us to Section 4, the plateau of potential and surviving the flat curve.
Here's where we run into trouble, and I know you've experienced this universal frustration. You put in the work, you do the 1% daily improvements, you really try to be a high-step hero, and yet you look in the mirror 2 weeks later and absolutely nothing has changed. You fail to see immediate results, and honestly, you just want to throw in the towel. Well, this happens because of what is known as the plateau of latent potential. Progress stalls because habit growth is exponential, it's not linear. For the first few weeks, your progress is essentially invisible because you're still laying down the foundation and letting that synaptic pruning do its work. This creates a valley of disappointment that typically hits between weeks 4 and 12, and sadly, this is the exact window where the vast majority of people quit. They walk away just moments before the curve finally bends upward and all that exponential compound interest finally kicks in.
Let's move to and see how this builds in Section 5, how to stack habits and your actionable framework.
To survive that plateau, we can use a genuinely brilliant, highly actionable framework popularized by B.J. Fogg and James Clear called habit stacking. Rather than trying to forge a brand new, incredibly weak neural pathway from scratch, you basically piggyback your new behavior onto a deeply pruned pre-existing neural network. You just use this simple formula. After my current habit, I will do my new habit.
Let me walk you through exactly how this looks in practice. Say you want to start meditating and planning your day, but you keep forgetting. Instead of setting some random alarm, you chain these small, low-friction habits to something you already do without fail every morning. Step 1. After I pour my morning cup of coffee, which is a deeply ingrained habit. Step 2. I will meditate for 60 seconds. Step 3. After I meditate for 60 seconds, I will write my to-do list for the day. See what's happening? You're just chaining these behaviors together using the natural momentum of your existing routine.
The absolute crucial point here is specificity. Vague triggers like, I will read more, or I'll exercise at lunch, are going to fail because they don't provide a clear instruction to your brain. Your cue must be immediately actionable and share the exact same frequency as your desired habit. Don't say at lunch. Say, when I close my laptop for lunch, I will do 10 push-ups next to my desk. Suddenly, the ambiguity is completely gone and the trigger is crystal clear.
Which brings us to our final, provocative thought. You now know that 80% of massive overhauls fail. You know that 1% marginal gains compound exponentially. You've seen the hard data that consistency beats intensity, and you understand how your brain physically hardwires these stacked habits into place. So my question to you is this. What tiny 1% change will you stack onto your existing routine today? Seriously, don't try to change your entire life by tomorrow. Just pick one small, undeniable habit, stack it to your morning coffee or your commute, and let the compound interest of self-improvement do the rest. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I absolutely cannot wait to see the unbreakable habits you build.